Okay. If we're watching this video, it is because today I have tasked you with identifying the narrative arc for Part-Time Indian. To be clear, we've only read or right around 100 to 120 pages, depending on when we're doing this X block lesson. So you can't identify all parts of the narrative arc, but you can do some of it. So I want you to be clear that by the end of this class, the expectation is that you and your group mates will have created a Google slide, and in that Google slide, you have had one slide that explains Junior's motivation in Part-Time Indian, another slide that tells me the conflict in Part-Time Indian, and then two slides, one for each that shows one rising action or obstacle in Part-Time Indian. And then for each of those slides, you'll be writing a CER paragraph that explains like what the motivation is. You'll make a claim about what the motivation is and provide the evidence and reasoning. Or you'll make a claim about what the conflict is or what the rising actions are. As you are doing that, though, I want you to be able to use this video just to give yourself a little bit of help as you start to think this through. And what you're looking at right now is the the narrative arc that we've used in class a couple different times. I'm going to walk you through it again as a reminder of some of the things you might be looking for. Specifically, though, the reason you want to watch this video is that as I'm talking through this, I'm going to be giving you like little hints about like cheats that you could use to find the evidence or start to think about Part-Time Indian and its narrative arc. Okay? Uh, so as a reminder, the narrative arc is just like the pattern that almost every story you've ever read follows. And then the most important piece to people is usually this climax, which you can tell is like at the top of the mountain, because it's the high point in tension. It's like the reason the book was written or the movie was made. And we're not there yet. So I'm not asking you to talk to me about climax, falling action, or resolution today. I am only asking you to talk to me about the beginning of the book in which we get motivation, conflict, and rising action. And for that reason, I'm going to zoom in on the video a little bit. Okay. But if this is what we're looking at right now, and this is what we're starting to figure out, stories start with expositions. This is just where you get background information. For example, we're talking about Part-Time Indian. Like, this is when you find out that Junior's Native American, that he's a teenager, that he's had health problems, that he lives on the reds. Those type of things, just before any action happens. But what you're going to be focusing on today is starting with your inciting incident and walking us through the rising action. And what an inciting incident is. An inciting incident leads us to our conflict. This is typically something that's going to happen pretty early on in a book or in a movie, because once it happens, it takes a little bit of time to see how this incident leads to the climax. So when we talk about an inciting incident, this is like one thing, one event that causes everything else in the book to happen, but that's because what an inciting incident leads to is either the conflict or a character's motivation. So if I'm thinking about The Lion King, the inciting incident that I would see in The Lion King is Mufasa getting killed, because that's a thing that like makes Simba run away, makes Simba like not sure if he still wants to be king, and it leads to all the chaos that happens when Scar takes over. Another like pretty like prime example of I can think of for an inciting incident is the Taken movies. So in the movie Taken, like right towards the beginning of a movie, you find out that the main character is just retired from being in the CIA, and then like 2 minutes later in the movie, his daughter gets kidnapped. His daughter getting kidnapped is our inciting incident because it leads to the conflict of the father wants to save his daughter, and the kidnappers don't want to give her back. And then we watch this whole long movie in which we see that main character like over and over again doing things that are leading us to him finding his daughter. All right, and a lot of that will be like him getting in fights, and we ask the question like, is he going to survive this fight? And obviously he does. Or like him breaking into a boat, and again we're like, ooh, is he going to get caught? And again he doesn't get caught. But that's because if the inciting incident is leading us to our conflict, then we should talk about what a conflict is. But when we talk about conflicts are when two sides or two forces oppose each other or are fighting against each other, right? But you can almost always figure out one side of a conflict by figuring out a character's motivation, right? And what a character's motivation is what that character wants most. So if we think about this, and we're in The Lion King, What Simba wants most, and this is debatable, it's either to avenge his father's death, to get back at Scar for killing his dad, or to be king. Alright, if we were going to be talking about the movie Taken, what what Liam Neeson wants the most is to save his daughter. Alright? So if we're talking about conflict, if the motivation is for Liam Neeson wanting to save his daughter, well, he runs up into a conflict because the kidnappers want the exact opposite. They don't want Liam Neeson to have his daughter back. Or if we're talking about Simba and Simba wanting to be king, his motivation is to be king, and then Scar is going to oppose that motivation because Scar also wants to be king, and we know that only one of them can. Same thing, if you're going to argue that Simba's motivation is to avenge his father's death, or to get back at Scar, like, what Simba wants most then is to kill Scar, and you know Scar is going to fight against that because Scar doesn't want to get killed. Okay. If you figure those two things out, though, if you can figure out what your conflict is, and you figure out what Junior wants most in the book, well, take what Junior wants most, and then you'll get your conflict by thinking about, well, why can't Junior have that? But the reasons that Junior can't have those things, or the things that like stop a character from getting his motivation, while we call that the conflict actually gets presented over the course of your rising actions. All right. So typically, you're going to have multiple conflicts here, or you'll have the same conflict that gets presented over and over again. So right now, if we're talking about The Lion King, we're talking about Simba's motivation to become king, and the conflict being that, like, well, he can't become king for whatever reason or another. Like, rise in actions you might have. Like, inciting incident is Mufasa dies. Because immediately, like, okay, Mufasa's dead, Simba should be king. But then we get rising action of, well, Simba runs away. Alright, and because Simba runs away, he can't be king. Alright, and then you could ask, well, why does Simba run away? He runs away because he's scared of Scar. Alright, and then you get another rising action. If we're still asking that question, is Simba going to become king? Will Simba turn around and become king? This becomes more complicated because when he meets Timon and Pumbaa, both of them say, like, Hakuna Matata, man. Like, it means no worries. Stop sweating it. Forget about your past. You don't need to go back and avenge your father's death. You don't need to become king. Just let it all go. Let those people figure it out for themselves. And at this point, we're sitting there as the audience, and we're like, huh, Simba seems pretty happy right now. Is he even going to bother to go back and become king? But if we're wondering, like, does he even bother to go back? That's complicating our motivation, because, again, what we think he wants most is to be king. And then you have Nala shows up. And Nala's like, dude, Simba, come back. Come save us. Like, things are falling apart here. Scar's doing a terrible job of being our king. And Simba, like, at the start of that, was like, no, I don't want to do it. Like, you go on your own. I'm happy here. And for the third time in that movie, we're like, oh, holy crap. Like, is Simba actually going to become king? Is he going to come back and get, like, back at Scar for killing his dad? Is he going to save these people? And these three things, all of a sudden, like, we're like, no, no, no. And, like, we're getting more and more nervous. Like, holy crap, does the bad guy win in a Disney movie? And then all of a sudden, you got Rafiki shows up, hits Simba across the head with a stick. Simba sees Mufasa, and he runs back, which leads us to our climax, which is the fight between Scar and Simba. To quickly do this again, if we're talking about Taken, if our inciting incident is the daughter being kidnapped, which creates the motivation of Liam Neeson wanting his daughter back, which creates a conflict because the kidnappers don't want to give her back. Like, you can say, like, the real inciting incident here is, like, when he's on the phone and he gives us the whole, like, I don't know who you are or what you want, I don't have money for you, but what I do have is a particular set of skills. Alright, he's saying, like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my daughter back. And then he flies to Europe, and we have that first, like, he breaks into the house and starts to piece together the evidence. And, like, he's building that mystery, but he's like, ooh, like, okay, my daughter was kidnapped by these people. So he goes to another house, and he breaks into this house, and he has to fight, like, 8 different people. Finally, he wins all those fights, and he gets this little nugget of information that, like, she's been shipped to this area. And again, like, a fight, we're wondering, like, does he win this fight, or does he die? Because if he dies, he's definitely not going to save his daughter. He's not going to get his motivation. Alright, and then, like, he again goes and breaks into a brothel, and, like, goes through and, like, finds all these different girls, but he doesn't find his daughter. And again, we're like, oh, shoot, like, he's definitely not going to find her now. Like, things are looking real bad. And then finally, like, he gets that last little tidbit of information. He breaks into the boat. He fights all those people again. And every time he's in a fight, we're wondering, like, shoot, is the guy going to die? Is he going to die? Is he going to actually win this fight? Does he save his daughter? Finally, he wins all the fights on the boat, and again saves his daughter. And you're hopefully noticing that like climaxes tend to be like when you get the answers to these things. Does the character get their motivation or not? Tends to become your climax. Okay. Now having watched all of this and knowing that like your inciting incident, like if you're looking for this, is going to be at the beginning of a book, like first 30 pages or so, typically the first few chapters. And then like the next 100 pages typically work to create rising actions. They work to create things that make it harder for the character to get their motivation or develops the conflict in a ways that makes it seem like less likely that the character will achieve their motivation. And then finally, in the last like 50 pages of a book or so, you'll get your climax, your falling actions, and your resolutions. Take this information and start to work on this step list. My first key to you would be like nominate somebody in your group and make them the organizer. And then the organizer should use this checklist and like make sure everybody in the group is doing their job, including at times like this person should be like, all right, like Hector, I need you right now to go find me the quote that shows motivation. And Juliana, I need you to go find me the quote that shows conflict. And like I'll work on finding the rising action evidence. But like break it up so like not everybody's doing the same thing. And that will work best if you can just decide on one person who gets to make those decisions. And I'll suggest that you use your whiteboard to like start taking notes and keeping yourselves organized, including like possibly just making a list of, without the evidence yet, like what you think your inciting incident is, your conflict, your motivation, so that if you forget or somebody in the group forgets, they can look back at the whiteboard to find their answer. All right, I'll be floating around the room if you have questions, but again, like at all times during class, you should just be working on whatever the next step on this checklist is. Okay?